Welcome back to Army of Roussillon, Lace Wars, War of the Grand Alliance on the Spanish frontier or the Spanish theater. We are going to start gameplay in this video, and we're just going to take it step by step while I get comfortable with this system. So the first thing we need to do in the operations phase of the first turn, which is the April-May turn of the 1689 start, we need to roll a random event. So much like GCACW, we throw a couple of dice and we get an event. And the event we got is Diplomatic Setback. So the random events table is here on the upper right, and you can see it's a D100 system. A lot of random events. These random events sort of represent everything outside the player's control going on in the theater. So Diplomatic Setback is the British and French ambassadors discover they have been sharing the same mistress, who is actually an Italian agent employed by the Spanish while working part-time for the Sublime Porte on behalf of a Basque separatist cabal with Jacobite ties. That's the kind of humor that we've got in this game system, by the way. They, the diplomats, intend to fight a duel. The winner will then return home to face a parliamentary inquiry or the king's wrath, depending on whom they report to, the former being the worst fate. Move the peace index marker one space to the left. So the peace index marker starts the scenario at 0, so we can't go any lower, which is down here. This essentially affects when the game ends. And so you see there's like some ways that this shifts in different ways. We check it every turn. Once we get to 18, the Treaty of Ryswick is signed, and that ends the 9 Years' War. So this is the sort of clock on the game, and there's really very little control over it. The game can end earlier than 1697, depending on how the game goes. So there is kind of a timer here that we have to make hay as each side while we can. In this case, the random event results in no shift because we start at 0, and you can't go any further left than that. So after we are done with the random events phase, I believe we're going to move into the operations phase, and this is where we're going to move pieces on the board. All right, so our first action, our first impulse, our first activity in the game is we moved the army of Roussillon, the Armée de Roussillon right there, you can see it. Moved it down. It had 12 movement points because it's carrying some artillery. We want to bring that artillery to bear against Comprodon over here. And so we move down, and you can see this is a hex map. The hexes are not defined on the map by hex sides, but rather hex centers. Those are those dots. So we came down here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 to Serre. And then to get here, that's hills. And because we're on a secondary road, so the difference here is secondary, primary road, and we're towing artillery, means we have to use the cost of the actual hex. So that was 4. So that brings us to 12. Now, I could continue moving. You're allowed to force march up to 100% of your movement allowance, but that comes with a severe risk because every time you move in this game, with a formation, you have to come to this table. And if we look across the top, we see how many movement points were expended, and we look down the left here, we see how many movement points are listed for our formation. The artillery right now had 12. That's what's limiting our speed. And so if we cross-reference how many the movement allowance versus the movement points spent, we come to various modifiers to this table down here, which is how much attrition we take when we march. So in this case, if we cross-reference 12 with 12, it's 0. Then we come down here, we roll a die, we rolled a 6, and that puts us starting on the D row of the attrition table. And then there's a bunch of column shifts based on various things that happen. So first of all, if you get a result in this table, that is the number of column shifts you are going to see, plus being bad, minus being good. We didn't get any, so on the 6, we start at D and we don't move from there. And then there's a whole bunch of row shifts for other things. So this is where having unassigned operations points actually helps you. So if I had not committed all 3 of my unassigned operations points at the beginning of the scenario, which I did, I committed them to this attack on Comprodon, I would have made my attrition somewhat better because we are still within short range of our depot at Perpignan, so we would have gotten minus column shifts for that. Unfortunately, we didn't get that. We did not move further than our movement point, so it was a pretty good chance that we were going to pass this. But you can see here that if we're an army HQ, which we are, we get -1. So that's already a column shift down. And then if we're in friendly territory, we get -1. So as you can see here, we are still inside of Roussillon. The border is actually down here because Comprodon is just across the border. So we actually got -2 column shifts for this. And then there's a bunch of leadership modifiers. Like if there's insubordination, if you've got a rash commander, which actually I may have to check this again, but in general, what I rolled was a 6 -2, so we're on the B row, and that's no losses. However, we did get FD yes. So FD yes is Forge Degradation. So that means that the hex we ended in gets a Forge Degradation marker, and if we are still there in that hex at the end of the turn, or for purposes for calculating the distance to our hub back here at Perpignan, it increases the distance when we're in Forge depleted hexes. And in this game, Forge Depletion is not just in its own hex, but it's a 2-hex range. So I'll explain that when it becomes necessary, but essentially each hex has 3 statuses of whether or not there's forage available. In this case, we were going to deplete the hex because our army is moving through there, and that's going to increase the range that we calculate to our hub when it comes time to check whether or not we take attrition from being out of supply or being really far away from our supply hub there at Perpignan. This is why you want to build depots as you go in campaign, because when you build depots let you be considered in short range to your hub as long as the depot is within supply to the hub itself. So there's a lot of logistical considerations with your planning here, and I'm just scratching the surface of them as I sort of play through, but that is an example of operational movement. Now I get to move all of my columns during my first impulse, and I'm going to do that with our coursing column and with our security HQ, which I set up here after setup because I wanted to have something to potentially counter the Spanish guerrillas. So onward we go. All right, we're coming up on the end of the first turn, the fourth impulse, and I've already learned some valuable lessons here. So here's the army of Roussillon under Noailles. We've actually taken quite a bit of attritional casualties. Marching through these hills is quite bad. You want to move fast. You want to go, because I have artillery, they each cost 4 movement points. So realistically, you can really only move 1 or 2 hexes and be marginally sure that you're not going to take attrition. I've been having to increase the pace a little bit just because I want to get to the siege before it gets too late. Maybe I'm pushing a little bit too hard, but I have already lost 4 units to attrition, which is horrible. One of my dragoons as well. And the dragoons are very powerful in this particular theater for a number of reasons, and you're forced to take horse attrition if you lose more than 1 strength point, 1 unit. So the Duke of Noailles has been pushing his units very hard. I'm not too concerned about it because we're still early in the game. The French outnumber the Spanish. We're going to be getting replacements and reinforcements, so it's not terrible. I just want to get to the siege as quickly as possible. But the reason I'm bringing that up is because our coursing operation here under column A with, what was his name, Marasson? Let's see if I can get the counter. Roussillon, his cavalry, has achieved 7 hexes on his coursing mission. And this is going to help us quite a bit. The reason we've been taking so much attrition here is we don't have any leftover ops points. You can see we're using all 3 of them for this attack operation. But we are done with the coursing mission here, and we are going to be rolling on this. We have covered 7 urban locations with our coursing in enemy territory, the cavalry going and stealing supplies from the Spanish population. We hit this one, where we had to deplete some forage. This one, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 here. We ended at Barrioles. So we are going to roll on this table now and see what we get from our coursing. Coursing. Let's see. I rolled a 3. Is that good or bad? It's probably good. Low is usually good in this game. So if we look at the 7+ urban locations, we rolled a 3. We get 1 op point, which is great. That's what I wanted out of it. We get a supply point, which allows us to build depots, and we have to add 3 forage depleted markers to any or within 1 of those urban hexes that we crossed this turn. So I'm going to do that now, but that's going to be quite good. That will potentially let me get a better attrition rate on the army of Roussillon now that I will have an opt point that I haven't used. 1 turn down. We played 4 impulses for the turn, and we moved from April, May into full May. And just a quick summary of what's happened. The army of Catalunya here under Villahermosa failed to suppress these Berrettines, as did this column HQ. Both of them failed the roll by 1, unfortunately. So they spent a whole turn trying to suppress that rebellion and did not succeed. Meanwhile, the French made really good progress. When we rolled at the end of the turn for more ops points, the French grabbed another one. So now they've got 2 uncommitted ops points. That's going to be very useful for a number of reasons, for a number of different things. The Spanish didn't get any more ops points, so they're still stuck with 1, but they're primarily on the defensive anyway, so it's not a huge deal. In this coming turn, we would like to have the Duc de Noailles here move in to Comprodon and try and besiege it. So we'll see if that happens. The Spanish guerrilla HQ spent that turn moving up to try and isolate some of these French forts along the border. And this is a really good example of how the guerrilla war is prosecuted. So this guerrilla HQ has a sort of area of effect based on the number of troops that it has, and normally, given where it is, would be putting this fortification into isolation because of sort of partisan activity. Thankfully, without knowing it, I moved this security HQ for the French down to kind of contest that zone. And because my coursing operation down here with this cavalry column allowed me to build a depot, I decided at the end of last turn to build the depot up in this region to potentially project my supply lines even further forward if I got a little bit more aggressive on future turns. Having that depot here actually allows this security HQ to keep this fort in supply. So even though there are Spanish guerrillas sort of messing with these French fortifications here, because we have a security HQ and a depot nearby that's not isolated, we are able to keep it in supply, basically. So you can see how this jockeying for position here, we might move this guerrilla HQ up in this direction, try and put some of these forts out of supply, get rid of their garrisons. I don't know. We'll have to see what the Spanish force makeup looks to be when we get closer to the end of the season. What else happened? I think, so I'm not allowed to do coursing twice in a season. So I've already done it for spring. I can start again in summer, which I'll want to do. So the question now becomes, what do I want to do with my French cavalry column here? And I think the answer is I probably want to try and collect these Baratine markers. Now, the risk here is that I have to be, I think by the end of fall, somewhere in here, I need to be back in Roussillon with the French army. So I cannot leave French forces in Catalonia at the end of the campaign season. So it's going to be very important that I don't get further out into the region than I can handle. So I'm going to have to do some calculations about how far I'm moving, how I get back, so I don't get blocked off by Spanish forces, because I lose prestige if I have French forces in Catalonia at the end of the year. So there you go. That's a one-turn look at Army of Roussillon. We're going to continue playing, and I'll show you anything else new that comes up. What I really want to do is get to the end of spring so we can do the quarterly turn where there's a bunch of stuff that happens quarterly that has a huge impact on the game. All right, we are going to have our first sort of minor combats of the game, and there's going to be 2 of them. The first is actually going to be up here. The Noailles' army marched here on top of this guerrilla HQ. There's no interaction between regular armies and guerrilla HQs. They're considered to be kind of like dispersed and operating in an area, so there's not like you can attack them or anything. But we do have this security HQ here, and that is also active. Both sides turn those HQs to active, mostly because I wanted to see how this is going to work. If they're within each other's range, which they are now that they're active, their range is, for the security HQ, is 4 times the number of strength points in there, so that is in movement points. So he's got, I think, 4 units. That's 16 movement points. That's plenty to get 1, 2, 3, 4 to get here, so that's plenty. And this one is number of SPs times 2. He's also got 4, so that's 8. So they're within each other's range. Now, the initiative player gets to decide if they would like to attack a guerrilla HQ with a security HQ. And in this particular instance, I'm going to do it just to try it. And we're going to roll on the Petite Guerre attack table. The leader of the Spanish guerrilla HQ, who is over here, Blas Trincheria, is a 4 in the upper left. And here, Coigny, the leader of the security HQ, is a 3. So the Spanish are going to get a -1 modifier because they have the better leader. So let's go ahead and roll it up, and I'll show you the table. So here's the roll. That's a 6 for the French and a 5 -1 for the Spanish. So it's a 6-4. So we come to this table and we look, we cross-reference. So the attacker was a 6, that's here in this column, and a 4. We get a 1-1. That means that we each lose an SP from each side, and so we're going to take those as casualties, and I'll show you what happens there. So down here, we've mostly got Micalets, so here we have a Migueletes, a Mountaineer unit. I'm just going to put this over here as a casualty, and we have the same thing here in this security HQ. We have some Miquelet, so that is also going to be a loss for the French. So pretty even, like a 50-50 battle. But the reason that you would want to do that is because some of the results on that table do allow for the guerrilla HQs to, if they attack a security HQ, to actually destroy a depot that's providing resupply. So if the French had passed on their attack, or the Spanish had initiative and they attacked and they got a good enough result, they could actually destroy this depot, and then suddenly this fortress would become isolated. So there's a bit of a guerrilla war happening there. Now, the next thing that happens, we have another, sort of at the end of this first impulse, we have another little combat here, are these two columns. So both of these columns are running with cavalry units in them, and because they have cavalry in this particular game, because of the scale of the game, they do generate a zone of control. That zone of control basically only extends into a hex where there's an enemy HQ that they could move into. And on my turn, I decided to take this this French column and move it up here next to the column of the Spanish, because what I want to do is try and push them off of here so I can capture this Barretines marker and force them to come back down south to deal with the rebellion before I can get there. So the way this is going to work, when we have two HQs with zones of control, is we have a skirmish. This is sort of like a minor combat because they're adjacent to each other. And this is just going to be a simple die roll with a very small chance that one side or the other will take an SP loss. So there's one modifier to this roll, and that is the basically what's called the Generalissimo personality matrix. Now, normally this is used for regular battles, but essentially what you're going to do here is you're going to look and cross-reference your leader's personality with the enemy leader's personality to get a die roll modifier. Now, what I really like about this system is that there is a personality behavioral element to all of your leaders. So for example, if we look here with the Spanish column that's being sort of skirmished against, we've got 2 red arrows. That is a rash commander. That has negative effects for marching, for attrition, but it has some possible good effects for battles. And in this case, depending on how he stacks up against the French cavalry here, we see that he is a conservative leader there, 1 yellow. If we had 2 down yellows, he would be timid, and that's usually pretty bad. You definitely don't want that. Here's another timid leader. So we have a rash Spanish leader with a timid French leader. And if we look up that on this table, the friendly leader is rash. That's that top row there. And the enemy leader is cautious. Excuse me, not timid, cautious. So R to C is a 0. And if we look at C to R, that's a -1. So the French are going to get a -1 modifier to the roll that they are making against the Spanish in this particular little skirmish. So basically here we want to avoid rolling a 0. You're rolling for your own HQ in the skirmish. And having a minus is bad. So you see the French rolled a 2. That becomes a 1. If that had rolled a 1, that would have become a 0, and the French would have lost an SP. The Spanish rolled a 4, and so neither of those is a 0. So both of these this cavalry skirmish was inconclusive, resulted in no particular losses to either side, and that's the end of that. Now, there were no regular battles. You always resolve HQ, guerrilla HQ and security battles and skirmishes first before you do regular battles. There are no regular battles for this impulse. And we're going to go to the second impulse of the second turn and continue with the campaign. And I think next turn we're going to see the army of Roussillon under Noailles besiege Comprodon. Here we go. We are ready to begin the siege of Comprodon, and we are going to do that for our impulse. We are going to have Noailles' army instigate a siege. So when we first moved into the fortification, we placed a blockade marker over the garrison. Now, when we activate him, we are turning it into an investment. So an investment, there are basically 4 stages to a siege in this game. You start in the blockade phase, that's when you move in. Then you can change it to an investment. When an investment is made, that is when you start to calculate the resistance value of the fortification and the units within it. And that's what kicks off the siege process. From there, you're going to be moving from stage to stage until you either get a surrender or you basically storm the fortification. The besieged side can actually surrender the fortress, and that gives them a little bit better chance to have less bad things happen to them after surrender, because there's a roll that you make to see what happens to the surrendering units and leaders. But essentially what's going to happen now is, I'm going to have to start making attrition rolls for the besieging force after every activation in which they try and prosecute the siege. And we're going to move, hopefully successfully, from investment to logement, which is sort of a breach in the walls. And then we're going to move from there into an escalade, which is kind of an assault. And hopefully the fortress will surrender before I have to assault it with my manpower. Now, the manpower inside that garrison are a couple of Somatin units, so these sort of like regional levies. And the Spanish have so few units on the map right now that I'm considering possibly surrendering the fortress voluntarily at some point. But I'm not going to do that till I see how the siege process plays out. Historically, the Spanish, I believe, did surrender the fortress after some conflict, so that wouldn't be too out of the ordinary. But let's go ahead and calculate the siege value right now. This is based on a number of different criteria for the fortress, and there's a whole huge list of them on the siege summary chart. So if I show you here, these 2 pages deal with siege progress and siege surrender and the siege resistance value. You can see the siege progress, you go from investment to approach. When you're in approach, you want to get a logement. When you're in logement, then you can get a breach. But as you see, there's a chance that you might lose operations points during a siege. And so if you get into a siege that starts to go poorly, you can actually grind down your ability to prosecute further warfare for the operation or for the turn or for even the season. So there's a bunch of modifiers on this. You definitely don't want to be doing it in bad weather. That's really the negative one, but you do get some positive modifiers for other things. And that does remind me that when we set off on this expedition to take this fortress, I'm just going to set that there for a minute. When we set off on this expedition, we did bring with us some sappers and pioneers. This was the one auxiliary we were permitted to have based on our army size. And so when we go from blockade to investment, you can see the circle there, the lines of circumvallation. We are going to place our sappers and pioneer auxiliary tasked to this siege. That's going to give us a bonus if we achieve what we need to achieve. So we've set up, we've brought the artillery as well. The artillery will come into play once we reach the logement stage, and we'll get some bonuses. So let's calculate the siege resistance value. Okay, so it turns out that the fortress only has a resistance value of 1. It does have the minimum garrison in there. We've got 3 strength points in the garrison of the fort. Unfortunately, all of the Spanish forts are slighted, which reduces their resistance value. And on top of that, the combination of commanders here is not advantageous for the defenders. We have got the Duke de Noailles, who is an aggressive leader with that red triangle, and the commander of the garrison at Comprodon is a timid commander that is also providing a resistance value that is not very good. So I suspect this siege is going to surrender quite quickly. Unfortunately, we took some attrition losses. So in the digging of the lines to invest the fortress here, we took a siege action, so we had to roll for attrition, and we rolled pretty poorly. So not only did we forage deplete the hex, but we also lost a battalion from the Duke's army, which is over here now. So taking some losses in order to get the siege set up, but I do have confidence that we will be able to complete it in the May-June turn. That is the end of the French impulse. And so we are going to go to the Spanish impulse. The Spanish having some difficulty here. So this column of French cavalry is providing a whole lot of headaches for the Spanish. They're very fast, and if what the Spanish are trying to do is prevent the cavalry from getting into this valley down here behind the siege and picking up all of these Barentine markers. We've got Villahermosa down here trying his best to counter the movements, but he's just not fast enough. So we've been up and down these hills trying to see where these cavalry are going to go. We have this cavalry column here who is going to try at the end of this impulse to what's it called, to suppress the Barentine Rebellion, but it is looking like the French are going to be able to have their way with this section of the map. We're just trying to push the cavalry away from these Barentines until we can do better as the Spanish in covering them off. So that's kind of where we are. I do have one rules questions if you've played Army of Roussillon here, and that is these forage depleted markers, which were placed after last turn's coursing operations. In the rules, it says that forage depleted markers, you get to remove 2 of them if they're not within 5 hexes of a single of any unit. This game is at the 4 kilometer a hex scale. The core rules are for the 16 kilometer a hex scale that most of the European front games are in other wars. But for some reason, the 4 kilometer hex scale is used for the 9 Years' War, which means you're huge, vast distances compared to what other maps in this series look like. So it does say in the rules that you're supposed to scale all of the distance calculations from the core rules by 4. A lot of the time that's done for you. Sometimes it's not exactly 4. So for example, the forage depleted markers usually only affect the hex they're in, but in this game they have a 2 hex range. You would think it would be a 4 hex range if you were doing equivalent scale. The same is true of movement allowances. They're times 4 from units. So I'm not sure if I'm supposed to multiply the forage depleted by 4, which would be 20 hexes to a unit, or if I'm supposed to do it by by 3, which would be 15 hexes to a unit. It's not really clear in the game specific rules. I'm going to play as if it's 20. In the normal game, if it's not within 5 hexes, which would be 16 times 5, it would be whatever that is, 80 kilometers, then the forage can recover. I believe if I multiply by 4 here, that would be the same. Or excuse me, 20 kilometers, so 80, yeah. So we're going to play that way, but if you have thoughts on that, if you're watching this video, I'd love to know what I'm supposed to do about that particular rule. Let's move forward. I'm going to have to do the Spanish Impulse, and then we are going to do the end of turn phase, which is going to involve a bunch of activity, and then we'll continue on with the siege, and I'll show you what the result is when I activate in the first impulse of next turn. We've had a very, very eventful turn interphase between the May and May-June turns going into the final turn of the spring. So a bunch of stuff happens between every turn in this game. There's a whole reorganization, random events, a lot of stuff that can only happen during the what's called the administrative phase, and just a ton of things change the game state, which I think is pretty cool. So the first thing that happened, the Spanish had a really good interface. Let's start there. You always roll for sea control every turn, and based on what part of the year you're in, there's a higher or lower chance that one of the fleets has sea control. Well, the Spanish won sea control for the first time this game. Now, each side is allowed to make a naval raid once per year, and that's what this yellow marker is. The Spanish, upon winning sea control, immediately decided that they were going to take a naval raid while they had the opportunity. Essentially, that's an abstract off-map Spanish naval raid of Languedoc, which would be, if we go up the coast and around, it would be somewhere up in that area, basically the French Riviera. And they rolled as well as you could possibly roll on that table. For every time that there is a Spanish naval raid in French home territory, the French are required to pull back a number of units from the map to the Languedoc box, which is going to hold them there for at least a turn. And I guess it'd be more than that because in order to come from the Languedoc box to the map, you have to spend 2 full turns in the box. So it pulls a whole bunch of units off the map for the French. Now, the French already don't have very many units, and the Spanish rolled 20 units. I would have had to pull essentially the entire French army of Roussillon off the map, with the exception of 4 units to maintain the siege of Comprodon. And if I didn't do that, then I would lose a prestige point. In the interest of trying to continue the momentum I have here and gather up all of these Barentines markers, I decided to ignore the raid on Languedoc, and that dropped French prestige by 1, so the Spanish got pretty lucky there. The other stuff that happened is the Spanish got pretty lucky on their dice rolls for suppression of Barentine Rebellion markers. So both Villahermosa and Miguel Ortazo, Hermosa here, Ortazo here, managed to suppress some Barentine rebellions. That is going to take them off the map for the time being. The French are not going to be able to get those, and the French column here that was sort of in the area trying to intimidate this Spanish column is not going to be able to do anything about that to grab that marker. So the French cavalry here is going to have to come deeper into Spain to try and capture some of these. Now, the problem is that we've got Villahermosa's army lurking, and while the French cavalry is better, they are likely outclassed by the number of units that Villahermosa has here. He's got a lot of infantry, and he outnumbers them about 2 to 1. So I don't necessarily want to try and be tangling with him. So for the upcoming season, I do think that I am going to move this column further inland and try and capture some of these Barentine markers out here. So it forced the Spanish armies away from the siege up here if they want to try and stop me. We'll see how that goes. The third way that the Spanish got very lucky was in the administrative phase. You make a roll for surrender for all of the siege operations that you've got going on. And unfortunately, it was a 30% chance, a 20% chance for the fortress at Comprodon to hold out. And it did. It did not surrender. So we had to expend another operations point for our goal of taking that fortress. And so we are down to 1. So if we don't take it this turn, we are going to fail that particular mission. And we are going to have spent the ops points for no apparent reason. And I believe when you, in this game, when you break a siege because you fail, the opponent gets prestige. So the Spanish are in a position now to double up the prestige gains they've got thanks to the naval raid and thanks to the stout garrison there in Comprodon to force me to have to assault the walls, basically. And I'm going to have to do that this turn. We did get a few reinforcements out of France. Finally, some French militia coming out of Languedoc were able to enter the map. We sent some of them to Noailles' forces here, and we sent the rest of them up here to where we have formed a new security HQ. And the reason that we did that was because in the final stages of the last month's campaign, the Spanish guerrillas broke off away from the siege and managed to come back up down through this valley and across these ridges and into the Puigcerda area. And they were in a position on the first impulse of their turn to be able to flip to active and potentially isolate this garrison there. So we had to put a security HQ of French militia there to prevent that from happening. They're pretty stout. They've got a lot of units in it, but the Spanish may try and attack it anyway. We'll see how it goes. The other thing the French had to do is spend an ops point to build a depot, because if any of these fortified garrisons were able to come under the guerrillas' influence without being able to resupply them, then it wouldn't have mattered that we had a security HQ there. We would have started losing units, the garrison units out of there. So we had to essentially protect that front. All of that is to say, I had to spend another ops point to build that depot, and that means that the number of ops points, because of the rolls that we made, the other way the Spanish got lucky is when we rolled for ops points, the Spanish got another one, the French got none. So now we're tied on available ops points, and that means that when we came to the turn start, we rolled for initiative because we're tied. So the Spanish actually had a chance to go first here and maybe throw the French off kilter. Unfortunately, the French won the roll by 1, and they elected to go first. So they are going to be able to prosecute that siege very first thing as we sort of finish up the spring. So you can see kind of all the gears working here as I talk about this. You can see all of the different ways that the game state is going to affect decision making, all of the ways that the sort of uncontrollable events by the players will establish a campaign tempo or diminish a campaign tempo, and some of the considerations you have to make as you're planning where you're going to get some units. Now, we haven't had any real reinforcements. We are probably going to get some. This is a quarterly turn here, this May, June, and during the quarterly turn, a bunch of new stuff happens, including some strategic events, which we haven't talked about yet, that represent sort of the other theaters of the war and other things that are going on politically around the 9 Years' War in Europe. So it's getting quite interesting and a lot of stuff happening, and I'm starting to get a more comfortable feel for the rules. I've also put out a bunch of red cubes, as you can see. You're probably wondering, what are all these red cubes? So the red cubes, and in some cases the red discs, represent prestige locations that if you set up a attack campaign plan and you conquer it, you will get prestige for. And so I thought it was a better way to visualize what is the path to victory here. What are we trying to set up for? Once we take Comprodon, what are the French going to be trying to doing in the next year's turn, or the next year's campaign, to try and accomplish? So as you see, the red cubes are worth 1 or 2 prestige apiece, and the French have some as well. So if the Spanish can ever go on the offensive, they might be able to take some of that as well. But the ultimate goal are going to be these discs. There's one at Barcelona, there's one at Perpignan, and there's one way down over here in the far west that I doubt the French are going to get to unless something crazy happens. So in the short term, we want to take this, win the prestige, and then we're going to want to probably capture as many Barentines markers as we can and then retreat back to France before the year is over. We've got a bunch of turns with which to do that. Probably not going to see too much combat or conflict. We may see some skirmishing here as these two cavalry columns shadow each other. But I'm really getting a good sense of the operational planning and pacing of this period with this game system. I think it's quite compelling, actually, even though not a lot is happening and I'm doing a lot of rules lookups. It is not the most intuitive rules lookups to do, especially when you talk about the game-specific rules, but I'll save those opinions for another video different about the system. So, yeah, that's where we stand. Sorry about this really long clip here, but that's where we stand. And let's go ahead and resolve the siege so you can see what happens there before we maybe bring this video to a close. Here we are at the siege, so we're continuing on. So a couple of things that happened since you last saw the siege. One, we lost due to attrition another unit out of the army of Roussillon under Noailles, just the nature of having a siege happening here. So they did not surrender, as we talked about. We do have our sappers and pioneers here. We just rolled to see whether or not we are going to be able to advance the siege to the next stage. We do get a +2 DRM on this because we do have more sappers and pioneers than they do. All they've got in there are a bunch of Samatan units, which are just basically like local militias, so, and the garrison SP. So we rolled a 7. We add 2 to that for the sappers advantage. We got a 9. That does advance us from the investment stage of the siege to the approach stage of the siege. So the approach stage now, you can see based on the marker that we're starting to dig the trenches that are going to take us towards the citadel itself. As I was saying, I just caught a small errata that I wanted to email the designer with on the tables. Anyways, it looks like the sappers and pioneers gave a +1 during the investment stage, but either way, I needed an 8 and I got it with a 7. So 7 + 1 is 8. That takes me to the approach stage. Now my sappers and pioneers will be a +2 on the next one. And it gets a little bit harder once you're on the approach stage, but if I can go from approach to lodgement, the Duc de Noailles here with his red triangle is allowed a free assault on the walls if I do that. So on his next activation, I will be able to do that. However, I will have to roll attrition. Now, it is actually a pretty good move that I haven't voluntarily surrendered it as the Spanish. I want to bleed the French as much as possible. And it is going to be pretty difficult, it looks like, to finish this by the end of the turn. So I'm hoping that I can get some good die rolls. Final impulse of the turn. We achieved a lodgement. So this means that we are now one step away from being able to escalade on our next activation. However, because the Duc de Noailles is an aggressive leader, we can immediately, upon achieving a logement, do a no-breach escalade, which is here, this table here. So it's basically a storming the walls without waiting for a hole to be blasted in the walls. And I'm going to do this because the quality of my troops versus the quality of the troops in the garrison is huge. I'm getting a -3 DRM to this roll because of that. And also, even though it's a no breach escalade +2, it's still a -1. The class of the fortress is a 3. So if we look down the 3 column, all I need to roll is a 7 or less. And yes, I will take losses, but I will also force the garrison to surrender. That's what the S thing is. So I could, if I didn't want to risk the manpower, wait until the administrative phase of this turn. But I want to explore all the game mechanics, and there is a chance actually that I fail to surrender on both. So I might as well get while the getting is good, as it were. So let's make that roll. And I just barely succeeded, which, woo. All right, so if we look down the 3 column, I rolled a 7, -1. I take 2 losses. They take 1 loss, and they surrender. So I'm going to capture the fortress. That is going to achieve my my campaign plan for the year. That's going to give me a prestige. I'm going to control that space. It's going to be great. And then there's going to be a couple other rolls that I do about surrender effects. What happens to, after I capture it, what happens to the fortresses nearby? They have a chance to become easier to besiege. There's also, I have to figure out what happens to the units and the leader inside. It's possible I capture them. So there's a whole bunch that happens when you capture a fort, and I'm going to do all of that now. We have finished the spring run here in Army of Roussillon 1689, and it was a pretty good final turn for the French. We completed the siege of Comprodon. That boosts our prestige up at the expense of Spanish prestige, so we're up by 1 over the Spanish. A lot of stuff happens in the interphase here in the quarterly turns, and I'll take you quickly through before we wrap this video up. So with the siege complete, I earned the prestige. The French army under the Duc de Noailles, the Spanish don't know this, but they are severely, severely undermanned. They suffered from a ton of attrition during this siege and are kind of on their last leg. So it was a good thing that they were able to take it and force it to surrender. The Spanish, unfortunately, they decided to hold pat and try and suppress some of these Barretines markers. And they were, again, unable to. Some poor die rolling on their part. It's a 60% chance that they do it. They just haven't been able to do it. The French cavalry column here that's been operating into enemy territory actually posted up in a really nice spot here. So you can see this river. All roads leading to it, up this direction, require a river crossing. And when you enter an enemy hex to try and fight them across a river, you need to make a leadership check with your army leader. And if you fail, you don't actually get to enter the hex. So they're in a really inconvenient spot here. They're going to continue moving next turn. But I think the Spanish are going to have a chance to respond before the French get the initiative if they would like it. So we're going to continue to try and maneuver here. There's a lot of Barentines markers still on the map. But for the first season of the game, French managed to capture 5. The Spanish have suppressed 2. That is going to come into play, I believe, when we reach the summer or fall quarter turn. Because it provides an advantage for the Catalonian revolt to the side that has got more. Now, you do check the Catalonian revolt every quarterly turn, and we did check it at the end of the spring. And unfortunately for the Spanish, the Catalan revolt has moved up into a pro-French position. You can see here, we're in the pro-French box. That's not good. What that does is for at least the next season, it is going to extend French territory 3 hexes into Catalonia. So all of the rules about where the French have to be at the end of this campaign are actually going to be 3 hexes. And also that means 1, 2, 3 is that Comprodon now is French-friendly territory, so the Duc de Noailles can stay there if we maintain the Catalonian revolt through the next season and into the fall. It's going to push forward the French's ability to be aggressive and to defend. Now, it is not all bad news for the Spanish. The Spanish guerrillas operating up here around Puigcerda, they did manage to force an isolation on, what is this? This is Montlouis, the French border fort here. They had to disband this garrison. So this is just wide open here for prestige. And the Spanish, if they can get one of their actual real armies, not the guerrilla HQ, up into this area, it would be a very easy way to take hold of that. So I might redistribute the way that I garrison some of the frontier here, just because we might want to put some units there to defend. It's still French territory there. The French security HQ has been getting beaten back over the last couple of impulses. So the Spanish guerrillas are pretty potent, but they just don't have any regular forces in the area to take advantage of that. Other stuff. The French avoided a Huguenot rebellion back in France, so they're not forced to withdraw units. Nobody has sea control going into the summer, so there's not going to be any more naval activity. We did do replacements in the quarterly turn. Both sides are really short on manpower, so that's one of the reasons why we haven't seen any battles. I do want to bring the battle procedure to you because it is quite interesting, but we just haven't been able to get into a position to have a fight. I thought we were going to have one, but the Spanish army that moved to attack the French column here was not able to pass their leadership check, so we weren't able to have a combat. So I do want that to happen. It's kind of an interesting process, and it is, again, involved like the rest of the game, but maybe in the next video. But in the meantime, we did get replacements. We're able to stack up another French column here full of replacements. So one of the things in this game that you're allowed to do, in addition to getting replacements based on percentage losses, and the French had a ton of losses, they do get a certain percentage of that back. The French and the Spanish actually are able to incorporate their militia units into their line units. So they're able to take militia soldiers and reinforce essentially eliminated regulars. And I did that this turn. So normally when militia are eliminated, they come back in the quarterly winter turn. However, if you choose to reinforce the manpower, they don't come back for a year. So you can see here in the May replacement turn, we got rid of a couple of French militia units to reinforce our armies. So we're working again with full troops, and now I've got a couple of different formations, and I've got to decide where I'm going to send that column. It's going to come up here at Perpignan, and I think what I would like to do is maybe bring it down in this direction. We are in a new season, so we're going to be able to do more coursing missions. I might have the French cavalry do that here behind enemy lines too. There's a lot of towns in this area around Barcelona that we can really easily accomplish our coursing mission, and that will deplete the forage of this region to make it harder for the Spanish. I did get an official ruling, by the way, about the forage depleted. It will be 20 hexes. That is from the designer. There's a couple other errata things that I found that are sort of different in the charts versus the game-specific rules. I think he said he was going to be creating an official errata document for this game. So if you do notice some discrepancies, if you're playing this, I would love to hear what you find, because he is keen on making sure that it is all correct. What else do I have to tell you? We've got some auxiliaries loaded up in a bunch of these armies. We are going to try and make better use of them this turn. These mountaineers are going to try and do some ambushes. We've got some grenadiers. We've actually got some deserter units here. So what's fun about those is you can send them to an enemy stack if you expend a prisoner that you have. And the French do have a couple of Spanish prisoners from the siege surrender. You can force an attrition check on the enemy army. A lot of options in this game. It's a big, wide canvas. Very cool. Is there anything else that I need to catch you up on? I don't think so. So we're going to go into the summer, and what I am probably going to do is spend a couple turns where both sides are just going to be in defensive campaign plans. We're not going to trigger any sort of assault. Historically, the Spanish did try to recapture Comprodon before the end of the year, and we may get to that point. The Spanish did pick up another ops point here. They have 3. That's going to give them the initiative over the French. But what I don't want to do is fail in an operation, and the Spanish forces are just quite bad. So unless we're able to get up into this area or possibly, just do a quick one and grab Mont-Louis, I suspect that the summer is going to be kind of a jockeying for position up in the northern parts of Catalonia as the French come down to try and protect their gains and the Spanish come up to try and pick off something easy when they do decide to initiate an attacking campaign plan. But yeah, with so little manpower, it's very difficult to accomplish anything. I can definitely get a feel for the larger games in the series with much more troops that you have much more frequent conflict. But so far, it's been a game of maneuver and logistics for both sides, and both sides have been reluctant to come to blows because that could really open up the theater to the other side. So we're going to continue to fight for Barentines, or maybe see if we can get the Spanish in a better position. But the French are pretty potent, so... let me know if you enjoyed this video on this system. I'm happy to do more. I do plan to keep playing, at least through the end of the year, which is another 8 turns, which shouldn't take too long, just to see kind of what happens as we go into 1690. But if you're enjoying this, if you want to see more about Lace Wars, I can do more videos. Leave me some comments if you're interested, and I can get into some of the other systems that the game provides. We still haven't seen some of the strategic events that happen in fall and winter. That affects the change in viceroy. The Spanish might get a new leader. There's also this faction ascendancy in the Spanish court, so this has a different impact on the game. Right now, the Austrians have it. It's most likely the Habsburg pro-Austrian faction is here, but one of the things that this can lead to later in the war is that you get some Austrian units, Habsburg units landing in Spain, so that would be a definitely interesting part of it. Anyways, that is the first season of Army of Roussillon, of this grand, sweeping, epic, operational game of the 18th century. And if you've watched it this far, thank you so much.